where people are taking out mortgages, whether it's because of a change of, family situation or job or whatever, or just can't put off the move anymore if they've outgrown where they're at. They're locking in now at 6, 7, in some cases, even 8% interest rates over the last couple of years.
COVID in 2020, 2021, 2022 really pushed people to advance towards sort of digitalness in their life much more than they were prepared to jump into before that. And
part of what this article said was that the National Association of Realtors, NAR, they have a pending home sales index, which reached 79 last month. An index of 100 is equal to the level of contract activity in 2001.
But I think what we're really describing is 100 home sales a month on average dropped down to 20. And then we now move to 21 and then 22 and then 22.5, right? So episode 24 of Market Moves with Mark and Jeff. Jeff, good to be with you in our first episode in the year 2025. Hard to believe that we are already here. I said this as soon as we hit 2024, saying good riddance to the high interest rate 2023. And dang it, if we aren't here saying the same thing about 2024.
I wish that weren't the case, Mark, but yes, indeed, good riddance to 2024, where everyone's hoping, I think, for a more prosperous 2025. In fact, I had exchanged some texts with a mutual friend and business partner between us, and I had said something to the effect of, here's to hoping for a more prosperous 2025. And I think his response was, yeah, you're not a kidding, or something like that. It's the reality is, it's been tough out there. And, if you're still in the game and fighting and surviving, that's probably a win, although it doesn't feel like winning when, the best case scenario is you're just around to see the light of tomorrow.
Well, you, the listener, can decide if the smiles on Jeff and I's faces are forced right now or not. I'm sure many that are listening to this can relate. But the last 3 months of the year have been a real grind, and we were talking about that in our making a case for 2025 episode, which strangely is about the most least listened to episode, Jeff, that we put out there. I'm not sure if it bleeds, it leads. So I think negativity maybe is what's drawing the listenership. But not a lot of people are wanting to hear making a case for 2025 that is positive. Maybe they just don't believe there is a case to be made.
Boy, I could understand that sentiment with the way things go. And it's one thing to hear that, real estate's cyclical and it goes up and down, but it's another to live it and, kind of bleed through it, sometimes. And so I think that's a reality that we deal with. I am noting, Mark, that the most watched episodes tend to be the ones where we have somebody smarter than us coming in to talk to us. So I don't know how I feel about that either, other than just to acknowledge it.
Yeah. Thank you. Boy, I will say, that 2024, just kind of looking back, this little episode or this little podcast that we put together has really exceeded our expectations. And it's largely because of the guests that graced us with their presence. And so very thankful to the long list of folks that came on, most recently, Danny Wiley discussing appraisal waivers and beyond. And we're hoping to line up a lot more guests here, not every week, but looking forward to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things we've set out to do is to pursue intellectual curiosities and to try to understand, as best we can get at it, ground source truth of what's happening and why is it happening, and what can we in the real estate space do about it. And I hope we'll get increasingly better at being able to hone in on that, but sure has made a huge difference with people being willing to come in and talk with us who might not have had a lot of incentive to talk to the little podcast that could. But it's we've had some enjoyable conversations, and definitely grateful for those that have come on and shared their perspective with us.
You bet. Well, sometimes we record with a whole lot of news. Sometimes we record without a whole lot of news. And this is one of those, I think, that's just a little bit of a chat between you and I here, talking about a few things that are out there. The real estate space generally quietens down quite a bit, especially on the mortgage side in the last couple weeks of the year. Loan officers maybe taking it easy. Borrowers certainly taking it easy as they're not trying to take care of business to wrap up the year. And so, I think you and I have found that over the last 5 or 6 years, this appraisers kind of slow down a little bit and maybe don't take as much work that was coming through. And we try to pick up as much of that as we can. So it's a really busy time for us getting this stuff, getting work done and working when others may not. But yeah, I think, generally as I'm looking into 2025, Jeff, top of mind is the dang Fed dropping rates a full percent. 100 basis points over the last 4 months of the year, and rates rising, a full percent, and sitting at 7.07% as we're talking right now. And I do think there is a lot of room for those rates to kind of come down without any other Fed action. And of course, they've signaled that they're not going to do a whole heck of a lot the remainder of this year. I hear a lot of folks saying the Fed doesn't know yet what they're going to have to do because we're starting to see some cracks in the economy, in consumer debt, in delinquent mortgage payments, in defaulted car loans, consumer credit rising, and all of these sorts of things. And maybe we've finally got some cracks in the general economy, which all results in bad news is good news for people in real estate.
That's exactly right. And the reason for that is because the way that the Fed combats bad economic news is to try to stimulate the economy with, more favorable interest rate policies and, liquidity policies and that sort of a thing. And unless the data continues to bear out some of these cracks that you're, referencing, Mark, and Jerome Powell has consistently said, we're going to read the data and then respond based on what the data says. We're not, we don't know what our policy is going to be or target interest rates in 2 years from now because we're responding to the economic data that's out there. And it just seems like it may, the economy may not be as strong as what some of the headline data and stuff that come out, might suggest otherwise. And I think they will respond accordingly. But so far, their latest read is that they've pulled back additional interest rate cuts from what was expected, I think, from 4 to possibly 2 in 2025. Of course, that is subject to change depending on what the economy does. But that pullback is maybe less of a change in interest rates on the Fed side, but is, like you said, there's definitely room for the mortgage rate to drop, and as that does, we notice quite a bit of sensitivity and response in volume, based on a quarter, 0.5% change in mortgage interest rates.
You bet, Jeff. And I threw up here. Maybe it'll be our only slide or graph of the show, which might be a record. I don't know, but this is what we've ended up with. We've ended up with these rates higher and longer. And that means that a lot of loans are getting done at upper 6s and 7%. And, what I think it was Lance Lambert from Resi Club, someone I follow on Twitter with some really good housing information. We're setting up little mini refi boomlets in the coming year or years here. And I certainly see that as the case. Once we get rates dropping, you're going to see it. I mean, you and I certainly deal with our fair share of refinances even today. And, you have to ask yourself, how on earth did someone need to refinance right now? But they happen, and they're out there even as rates are sitting at 7.1%.
Yeah, exactly. Anecdotally, you'll go to the house where somebody's gotten divorced and they wouldn't have otherwise, refinanced, but life circumstances require that they buy out a spouse or something. Life happens. And the thing that was interesting with this chart as I looked over it, Mark, was that, prior to the pandemic in 2020, you had very few mortgages that were under like a 4% interest rate. But it was just interesting to see how many spiked, by about 2022 coming into 2023, almost 80% were under were at 5% or less on their the mortgage rate. But that's peaked and is now starting to trend kind of the opposite direction. And so this mini refi boom, that you referenced is kind of setting up. And And I think that's where we start to see the sensitivity where people are taking out mortgages, whether it's because of a change of, family situation or job or whatever, or just can't put off the move anymore if they've outgrown where they're at. They're locking in now at 6, 7, in some cases even 8% interest rates over the last couple of years. And as soon as you get a little bit of relief, it makes sense to refi. I think it's setting the stage for there being some transactions that when almost everyone, it felt like, was under 4 or 5% interest rate, it was just harder to expect to see those happen.
Yeah, I remember specifically a drive home from work, 6 o'clock. I remember it kind of getting dark and talking to the great John Holbrook with Black Knight, right as these rates were, hitting their peak, and being like, he's like, dude, the entire country has a loan at less than current rates, and it has been a harsh reality, but these rates have stayed high for quite a while now. That you really clawed back some that are in a position to need to refinance it at some point. Boy, what have we gone through? 3 episodes now talking about appraisal waivers. I think refis are set up for appraisal waivers for sure, but those are probably only going to be in the 10 or 15% of total loans. I think they could shoot up to 50%. That's certainly a possibility, but you've had so much shift in value that you may end up, and likely will end up, with quite a few appraisals.
Yeah, exactly. Historically, when the waivers have been high as a percentage of the transactions, it's because appraisers were at capacity. Now, I know there are definitely appraisers out there that are concerned that the waivers are going to take over, and that might, that might be what happens. I mean, I'm definitely, cautious on that front, but an improvement in interest rates, an increase in volumes generally is, I think, what everyone's hoping for in 2025. And, there's some data to make a case, that 2025, may be a step up from what 2024 was. As I've looked internally and kind of anecdotally, 24 was a step up over 23 as we were all reacting to the initial shock of, significant interest rate increases over a short amount of time, and it seems like, it doesn't feel like it's short in the immediate term, but, the market's responding. It just takes longer than you'd like for it to.
Yeah, you bet. So, I think just all sorts of unknowns that are coming towards us here. I think it was Danny Wiley that was suggesting that, look, if somebody's been paying their mortgage for 5 years and they got a refinance in front of them that lowers the payment by 15 or 20%. I don't need to think too much about that. They were already paying it and have proven that they can. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how all this shakes out. And dang it, Jeff, I don't know what it is about my subconscious tendencies scrolling through social media, but I seem to be drawn to these conspiracies one way or another. And we've got a new pandemic on the horizon, possibly with some bird flu or something. Have you seen anything about this? That may be the next thing to throw us in a loop.
Bits and pieces, although I have heard of bird flus in the past that never turned out to be as disruptive as what, certainly what COVID was, in becoming a worldwide pandemic, and then a massive response, across the board. As I've thought about it, Marky, we may look back, and at least for me, I may have underappreciated like the severity or the amount of change that the pandemic has kind of ushered in. I'm not anxious. I'm not signing up for another one in the short term. So I'm hoping that the bird flu is much ado about nothing. But I got sick as heck on New Year's Eve, though. I don't think it had anything to do with bird flu. It certainly wasn't consumption on my part. But for whatever reason, I started the new year not feeling great and kind of purging out with the old and in with the new.
Too much chocolate milk, Jeff?
Did I have any that day? I don't think so, but it was something I ate that was not good. And oh man, I did not feel great there, but I don't think it was bird flu. Although in full disclosure, I didn't have myself tested for that.
Boy, well, I'll tell you, it's inescapable to be unsettled about things, throughout the globe right now. And I think that, that enters a home buyer's psyche, I think too, and the seller's psyche. You've just, the awful situation that happened in New Orleans. You've got the sort of in parallel, kind of car bomb in Las Vegas. You've got these drone sightings everywhere, which who knows what the explanation is, but they do seem to be actual sightings. And on and on. You've just got so much. I think it's just an uneasy populace right now on a number of fronts, and rates at over 7% are a problem. And I'll say that you were talking about the impact of COVID and what that had on us, and I think that leads us into just kind of an interesting mini documentary that we saw on CNBC. But what I have found is that COVID in 2020, 2021, 2022 really pushed people to advance towards sort of digitalness in their life much more than they were prepared to jump into before that. And I could see that in our own little business and in scheduling appointments through text message, or kind of getting a survey filled out from a borrower. They just weren't willing to do that back then, and COVID made that really, really possible, and it stuck. But we'll have this link in the show notes, but a CNBC segment on malls, Jeff, and what they're doing with them. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. It was kind of a fun or just an interesting article, or at least news video that we watched. And we've heard about, and I've seen many stories about a glut of unutilized office space sitting out there vacant or unnecessary, in part resulting of this work from home and some of this impact from the pandemic, as you talked about, Mark. But this particular focus highlighted a mall up in the Northeast where they had taken the second and third stories and converted those into, I think they were condo units,
apartments,
yeah, exactly, and made living spaces out of them. And one of the challenges that I've heard discussed and certainly makes sense to me is that if I've got a big blocky office building, it's hard to convert that well into residential space without feeling like you're in an interior cabin on a cruise ship or something, without any windows and stuff. And you got to have secondary egress, and you got fire codes and stuff with residential that makes retrofitting office in some cases difficult. But this retail retrofit into residential dwelling units was pretty fascinating. They interviewed a lady who owned and lived in one of these, and talked about some of the benefits of having a lot of the amenities or things that you might have to go out to do, right there kind of in what becomes your greater complex, with all sorts of food and just personal care and other services that you don't even have to leave the building to have access to. And obviously that doesn't make sense, in every town across the country, but in larger populated areas where you're already in a downtown setting, close to things, they were talking about a number of the positives or the benefits of the proximity to stuff, but then also having as many things in the project as they did.
I think one of the stats provided in it were that 68% of Americans live within 20 miles of a failed mall, one way or another. Just an enormous amount. And I'm sure most of the listeners, if you're not in a completely rural setting, certainly in Houston, we've got many, many of them. And you look at them and you drive by them every day, saying, man, if there was only a way to make a live, work, play environment there, it seems really appealing with at least a certain segment of the U.S. population. It was, I think that the other stat that was notable and I was not aware of is that I think it was, everybody is having to figure out what to do with these malls, and 54% of the conversions ongoing were residential related. It may not be the actual mall itself being converted, but living complexes built in the parking lots. All these malls have vast parking lots, and so you're in walking distance to the mall and use all that, and then that changes the dynamic of the mall itself, and what sort of tenants end up populating that, not just destination retail or department stores. I'm not sure people in their 20s even know what a department store is, but so you can see a lot of like personal care and that sort of thing, maybe even entertainment, sort of bars or restaurants. So I thought it was a really interesting article. I think it is an example of the change that you and I have been talking a lot about, that we all, even as appraisers, realtors, loan officers, have to be contemplating these days, because the market is changing all over the place. And, seeing examples of how some are figuring out how to navigate that, it's interesting, and I think should be used as inspiration on what to do or what not to do, I guess.
Yeah, it's an interesting case study in evolving markets, changing demands and preferences, and then retrofitting something to meet current demands, because there's housing affordability is a challenge we've been talking a lot about, as a combination of high interest rates and high home prices. And so creatively taking an underutilized real estate asset, converting it into something where there's proven demand in terms of housing, definitely makes sense. It's an interesting contrast, Mark, to something that you had pointed out to me recently, over in China, where they've built not just malls, but like entire cities that are, sitting vacant or unutilized. And in this case, in the US, you've got at least a retrofit, where that can meet existing demand, where I think a combination of, economic uncertainty, demographics are a real limiting factor or a challenge in China, with them not like replacing themselves, but they've had these infrastructure projects to spur economic activity. But at the end of the day, there's not the demand or an alternative use to put, these massive projects to. And to me, it was just a little bit of an interesting contrast, where at least here we've got demand for an alternative use of the malls, whereas I'm not sure what the demand of or what an alternative use of a city with no people to occupy it is.
Boy, and these are, I'm glad you brought that up, only because it's interesting to me. And I don't know exactly how relative it is to this discussion, but it is another example of enormous macro changes that are happening. This isn't just the little loan officer that could, or the little appraiser that could, but, it was a Zero Hedge blog post that I was reading on the U.S. economies versus the China economy, and it was quoting 2012 and 2013 predictions from economists that China was going to overtake the U.S. economy in 2018 or 2019. And this article was pointing out that it was an economy largely built on bubbles, that this massive construction of ghost cities and all of these to kind of meet future demand was there, but it boosted the economy, but it's turned out to be 100% waste, that there just isn't demand for that. And then you add on top of it that they have an enormous population collapse problem, where the generation of workers is shrinking quite a bit. And so now I think where that 2012 and 2013 were predictions that they would overtake the US. Now it wouldn't be until 2050, but now probably not likely at all. And I think AI and the sort of tidal wave that's been is now, what is China to do with all this manufacturing to some degree that may not be as necessary, and as quite the advantage down the road. So just a whole lot of change. And I think China's economy is really taking it on the chin right now, not being out in front of some of the changes that have ended up taking place. I think they are on top of many of the trends globally, but their job and Microsoft and Salesforce, their job is to be in on every emerging tech, in case it is the piece of tech that is carrying the next wave, where the smaller guys, the smaller companies that might be listening to this podcast, or we can't make bets on all those things. Very few of us can. We've got to pick the right thing, and we damn sure better be right.
Yeah, not nearly the margin for error. And to me, it's just interesting, that the way that all of these trends and, all of these market forces interact and interplay. We're setting up for, what's being termed a potential trade war again with China. Many are suggesting that it's posturing to, try to negotiate, favorable terms and with tariffs and stuff with the new incoming administration coming in. But whether that has a carryover effect into inflation and, what interest rates do. I mean, the economy, obviously is all interwoven and interconnected, and it's hard to understand. It's easy to pick out a single, data point or trend and assume that, like how it's going to impact you directly in your business. And I don't claim to be bright enough to to be able to do that. But it is interesting to at least try to understand some of these trends and things that are going on out there, because it does work its way into demand for the services and products that we offer as appraisers or anybody in the real estate space. And it'll be interesting. I mean, it's always interesting to see. Additionally, you're a baseball player, Mark, and I like to throw curveballs and changeups and fastballs at you just to, to take the conversation different ways and see how you respond to it. But you're a better hitter than I am a pitcher, I think.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm not sure I agree, but just it is. I hope that it's valuable. I certainly find that it is. This podcast has been that, just sort of pulling at curiosity threads here. I finally listened, Jeff. We had mentioned this maybe in November, that the Javier Milei podcast with Lex Friedman, which I didn't think was particularly great, but it was great to kind of listen to some of his perspectives and what they're accomplishing over in Argentina. And dang it, I think the picture has only gotten better since he recorded that. So, just removing regulation every which way. And I think about the appraisal space and how much regulation we've got. It makes it very difficult to operate in our space for sure.
That's a good point, Mark. Yeah, there really is. It's interesting as I think about Elon when he bought Twitter and then went in, walked in with the kitchen sink, and then let that sink in. But what he did was cut drastically the headcount, not just some marginal change, and got the company like financially viable again. Javier Milei has done the same thing in Argentina, and the corollary is interesting to me in part because once Elon kind of set that trend, it's almost like it became in vogue in the tech space to cut headcount, get back to profitability. The market isn't what it is. We have to be profitable. And I wonder if what Milei has done in Argentina will be a similar trend setting, scenario. It seems to be setting up for that with Doge and then bringing, Elon like into the government to, potentially make similar reductions in waste and expense. And these things tend to, once it demonstrates that it works, people tend to pile on. And I don't know that I'm seeing any trends like that emerge in like appraisal reduction or in reduction of regulation, other than it seems that with the incoming new administration and maybe a shift away from some of the DEI initiatives that have been out there, I do wonder if there will be some changes that impacted appraisers at that level. But it's interesting to observe these large like one-off situations that then have a carryover effect in a space, whether it's an industry or a country.
You bet. Yeah. I mean, boy, we've seen a lot of change, in banks and appraisal management companies, reducing or eliminating their employed staff of appraisers, in kind of following the, just getting efficient from a cost perspective. That seems to have happened quite a bit in our space. And, I think everybody is seeking control of the appraisal process that they may have lost a little bit. And certainly something you and I are working on is try and help the users of our services maintain some level of control in customer service and in quality and all that sort of stuff. So there are ways to rebound, I think, and react to the changes that have taken place in the market. We'll see if we can get there. And we talked about the last podcast that, a lot of these changes that are upsetting appraisers, whether it's new UAD, whether it's hybrids, whether it's property data collectors, these are adding increased flexibility both to the users of our services and the performers of our services. And, I think to be determined how those things will play out. But I like increased flexibility. I think that feels fairly modern in where most industries are heading.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. And, it's kind of like we talked earlier on of, the pandemic ushered in changes or did, forced changes that maybe wouldn't have been made otherwise. And I think there are other forces, technology and artificial intelligence that we've talked about are ushering in opportunities for change. And so, as we look at how things are done today, it's going to continue to evolve and probably at a faster rate than, even than it has in the past. But you can embrace it or you can fight against it. One way or the other, it's here and it's fun to be part of, in my mind.
Well, Jeff, returning us back to real estate trends here, you've got a couple of excerpts from both increasing housing inventory and pending sales increasing. Do you want to lead us into that?
Yeah, you bet. In fact, you beat me to it. There were two articles I found that were just interesting as we kind of digest these broader trends that relate specifically to housing in the U.S. And what I wanted to do, Mark, was just read a couple of excerpts and then get your maybe initial thoughts or reactions. One is talking about housing inventory, active listings. It was up in November, 0.5% over October, which in and of itself isn't huge, but it was up 12.1% year over year, and is the highest level of available active listings on the market since 2020, since very early days of the pandemic. One other quick stat here I wanted to just share. More than half of the listings in November, 54.5%, sat on the market for at least 60 days without going under contract. The highest share for any November since 2019, and nearly a 50% year-over-year spike from the prior year. The typical home went under contract and did so in 43 days, which is the slowest November pace since 2019. Any of that resonate with what you're seeing out there?
Boy, yeah, and I think we've been talking about all year that the Fed is seeking increased inventory with their increase in rates one way or another, and we've had a shortage of inventory problem for damn near 10 years at this point, but really exaggerated over the last 5. And inventory is increasing. I'm not sure many people that are voluntarily entering the inventory pool here. I think we've got a lot of folks that have to, whether life changes are happening, whether it's a growing family, which would be a great thing, whether it is a shrinking family, which would be a bad thing, maybe. Or we've got an enormous amount of inventory hitting from builders that are happening all over the place.
Yeah, I think you're right in that it's probably a combination of those things. I've seen some headlines around builders adding inventory, increasing incentives. I've got a brother who is a real estate agent here in town, and is marketing pretty heavily that he can get people into a 5% interest rate because of builders' incentives and what they can offer on their inventory and product, and in part because they're motivated to try to move the inventory that they're increasingly sitting on. And so I think what you're talking about is, I'm seeing both in headlines and kind of locally and anecdotally as well.
Yeah, I had mentioned Lance Lambert from Resi Club earlier in the episode, and he had also put out a post that does that monthly. I think they're saying, "Hey, realtors, loan officers, appraisers, what are you seeing out there?" And you get some nice anecdotes, and I saw one in particular that was talking about a material surge in for sales, troubled loans, that sort of thing. And for the first time really in Q4 here, and I kind of get a sense that there hasn't been an appetite to foreclose, that there have been a lot of workout options or just put off. But I don't know if that sentiment is changing one way or another, but you're getting people that are having trouble paying their mortgage, at least anecdotally in certain spots. And that's adding to the inventory too. So it's not a choice to put the property on the market. It's just a necessity.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's exactly right. Well, the other article that I saw that was related to that, it talks about pending home sales also increasing, which for anybody that deals in residential transactions is a good thing. Mm-hmm. Couple of things I'll let you react to here as well. An uptick in pending sales for the fourth consecutive month. November saw a 2.2% uptick in pending sales over the prior month, and it is at the highest level since February of 23, which isn't as high of a level or going back as far as I'd like to see. But one of the two things that were interesting, this one's just a little bit funny to me, but part of what this article said was that the National Association of Realtors, NAR, they have a pending home sales index, which reached 79 last month. An index of 100 is equal to the level of contract activity in 2001. I have no idea why they pegged their like midpoint at sales activity in 2001, but is what it is. So I mean, definitely off pace from from where that was back 20 odd years ago. But the more relevant takeaway here, Mark, was that was a quote by NAR's chief economist, Lawrence Yun. He said consumers appear to have calibrated expectations regarding mortgage rates and are taking advantage of more available inventory. Mortgage rates have averaged 6% for the last 24 months. Buyers are no longer waiting for or expecting mortgage rates to fall substantially. Furthermore, buyers are better positioned to negotiate as the market shifts away from a seller's market. It appears that some markets will outperform others based on local job gains and inventory and stuff like that. But it's something that we've touched on, for quite a bit, that there's got to be kind of an acceptance of this new normal as far as, what interest rates are. People are getting out of this expectation that, well, when rates get back to 3%, I can afford a home again. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think we definitely talked about that. The shock of rates kind of 2xing is really difficult from an affordability perspective for people to take. First, I don't know I don't think this information would be including December numbers unless it was produced in the last couple of days. Do you know if it is?
No, it just through November is what they had.
Yeah, so I'm really curious to see what December numbers will say. I wonder if there isn't a dip. I say in baseball, 2 wins is well, I don't even remember what 2 wins is, but 3 is a winning streak. So 3 months in a row, great. I think it was 4, so that's good. But I think what we're really describing is 100 home sales a month on average dropped down to 20. And then we now move to 21 and then 22 and then 22.5, right? So just, still awful. We'll take the win in the increases there. But I think to the point that folks are getting used to interest rates being where they are, I think we are probably getting there. But I think, Jeff, that 7% handle is what just makes the market stop. When we're below that, we have things moving. But we've had rates in December over 7% for whatever reason, and I think that hurts any momentum we get.
We are definitely seeing the rate sensitivity when interest rates drop out of that 7 handle, like you're talking about. We see more mortgage transactions or more appraisal orders coming in. When they go up very much, we definitely see the market respond to that as well in terms of volumes. And it's probably this bouncing along the bottom kind of a metaphor for a while until you see a sustained lowering of the mortgage rate, which I think will drive transaction volume pretty good, but hasn't done so yet, other than these very kind of minor improvements or increases. And hopefully it's a trend that is going a good direction and is sustained in that way, but remains to be seen whether that's the case or not.
Yeah, you bet. I want to see those rates below 6% or below 7%. I'd like to see them below 6, but below 7 is really where I think we need to go. I am concerned, at least anecdotally in the markets we cover, concerned about this builder inventory. It's a lot, and I think they are expecting things to move. I think they have room to move with concessions and rate buy downs and all of that, but there is a lot of builder inventory out there, and that has been 50 or 60% of the sales that are occurring. I think we've shown in prior episodes graphs. So watching them closely, I think, is important for anybody in the space.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Well, I think one last thing that we wanted to touch on, which has become something of kind of an interesting topic, one that those in the GSEs aren't particularly motivated to opine on, I don't think. But you had shared with me a headline of a popular hedge fund investor who was talking about the likelihood of pulling Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac out of government conservatorship. What'd you see there?
Yeah, so Bill Ackman, I think it's so cool that these hedge fund guys have a platform to be a little more public in how they see the world. I think they're a very unique perspective that I haven't had much access to before. So it's really great to see. But he had posted a a stock play that he doesn't want to do, doesn't want to post something like that very often, but felt very comfortable about this and wanted to create the discussion. Maybe he's just talking his book, so you decide. But I think it's really interesting because us in real estate don't often have these stock plays to assess that we might know a lot about because of the manner in which we do business. But he has owned Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae for a long time in his portfolios. He believes that the pathway to privatization is now very clearly laid out and puts it at 60 or 70% likelihood that this would happen. Trump wanted to do it in the first term. He's really indicated that he'd like to do it in the second term. We had Ed Pinto, fellow at American Enterprise Institute and former Fannie Mae chief credit officer, I think it is, and was saying, look, I know they'd want to, but I think the odds are very well stacked. They need a lot of capital to back themselves up, and people are underappreciating what the Fed's sort of too big to fail backing is providing. Nobody's really put a value on that, and that's hard to get out from under. Would Fannie see the same? Fannie and Freddie, would they see the same success one way or another? But Bill, maybe we can put the link to his post on X on this topic, but thought that it was very easy to obtain the capital through IPO privatization to cover their assets and backstop potential losses, which was the thing that Ed didn't think they could do, and Bill thought there's a pretty easy path to doing it, and it was trading at maybe $1.50 a share before Trump was known as the candidate to win the election, and doubled right when that happened. And a lot of people think Fannie and Freddie could return to their 34 a share if privatization happens sometime in 2026. My goodness, this is not a financial advice, so I don't think anybody would actually take that. But I think it's a really interesting discussion, and in a thread you and I have been pulling at for a while. I don't own any shares of Fannie or Freddie at this point, but noteworthy nonetheless.
Yeah, neither do I. But it was interesting to see him come out and kind of lay out the case for how he saw a path to actually doing it. And it's kind of at the heart of what we've been probing or pushing on is there are different opinions, different data points out there, and it was interesting. I don't remember, and maybe you do, the time frame over which he said he had held the Fannie and Freddie stock. I don't know, it was 10 years. It may have been more or less than that. Whatever it was, he said it was basically today what it was back when he bought it. Like, it hadn't really moved appreciably over this extended hold period, but is now making the case for how they could go to privatization, and if they did, what that may mean in terms of the stock price. Now, this could just be a pump and dump kind of a scheme that he's pushing. I don't read it that way necessarily, but interesting that if they do move that direction, and there's an appetite and an ability on both sides to get them out of conservatorship, what might that mean in the market? What might that mean for them? What might that mean for appraisal volume? Like, there are a lot of just interesting aspects if they aren't overseen by FHFA versus if they are.
Yeah, Jeff, I think that's interesting. And you have mentioned a number of sources. I think we've talked about them on this show, that it's probably likely that things like appraisal waiver expansion is more likely and to get larger in application in a private Fannie and Freddie. That would not be good for appraisers. And I've learned about the concept of spread trades, which would be something like, let's say that you think Tesla is going to put robo-taxis on every street by the end of next year, and that's going to make Uber a really tough thing. You would short Uber and you would bet on Tesla stock. Or if you thought ChatGPT was going to kill some software company that's publicly traded, you bet on ChatGPT, you bet against the other. And it's probably not at least worth consideration that if appraisers are going to be worse in a private Fannie and Freddie, that they could figure out how to spread that well and kind of cover their bets. I don't know, but just interesting to think about. I think an interesting mental exercise. of all the change we've got to be dealing with, it looks like this is one that we've got to deal quite a bit with too. And, I remember fairly vividly Trump talking about a overhaul analysis of the federal mortgage process or financial process revolved around mortgage. And boy, I don't know what that means, but I'm sure that isn't good for the status quo.
Well, yeah, no, neither, I don't think or expect that it would be either for the status quo. There likely would be opportunity there. I may be the only one dumb enough to follow your financial advice. But what I'm hearing you say is buy some Freddie stock and Fannie stock. And then that way, if appraisal volume goes down, at least there's a hope and a prayer that you might make it up in a return on their stock price, which you make up for in lost revenue, appraisal revenue.
There you go. Right. Yeah, exactly. And, and I hope I think we'll be able to post the link to the post. And, I think many think that it could return in privatization. It could return to a stock price around where it was, in the 34 range. So it's a pretty big, I think that's the reason Bill cited as being willing to post this, because he thought there was a meaningful return there. So anyway, again, not financial advice. We might lose viewership over being willing to say this out there, but there it is. It feels like news worth covering. Very good. Okay, well, Jeff, I think that about does it for us. Any other things you want to close out with?
No, I think that kind of rounded out what we had for the docket, Mark. Buckle up for 2025. We're excited to see, what it brings, hoping that there's some improvement in conditions, at least in the residential space. We'll continue to investigate trends as they come up. Looking forward to what the future holds, and there'll be something to talk about for it, I'm sure.
Yeah, Jeff, I think I'll just close with that. We're ambitious with the podcast. We don't intend to stop. We're hoping to do one every week, and just kind of pull at our curiosities and interview guests, not just in appraisal or real estate, but wherever it leads us, and hope the listeners and viewers will come along for the ride and appreciate it.
Amen. Yep, absolutely. It's enjoyable to do and forcing us to learn more than we would otherwise. So we'll keep going at it.
Very good. All right. Till next time.
Thanks, Mark.